I'm Idella with the Center for Technology Commercialization, or CTC, and I'm here with Christina Runge. Is it Christina Runge or Christina Runge?
Oh, Runge.
Runge. Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
She is CEO of Ascending Hearing Technologies, and we asked Christina here to share some steps that she took in launching her company, AHT, and especially from the perspective of being faculty and as a clinician. So, Christina, thank you so much for joining us. And just to set the stage, can you tell us about your roles at the university leading up to the time when you were thinking about this kind of technology commercialization endeavor and starting a business?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Idella. So the roles I have, the hats I wear at the Medical College of Wisconsin is I'm actually an audiologist by training and an auditory neurophysiologist for my research training. And so I came here as a postdoc about 18 years ago. And so I've been doing research and overseeing clinical programs there. So I'm an auditory scientist and faculty member. And then, as I mentioned, the director of some clinical programs in the communication sciences area. So really overseeing clinical programs and research programs for communication disorders, and particularly for hearing loss. What led me up to this aspect about thinking about technology commercialization was really my collaborator and my business partner, Yi Hu, who is Dr. Hu is faculty at UW Milwaukee, and he's in the he's a computer engineer and computer scientist. And so we joined forces about 10 years ago. We've been collaborating for research, developing new technologies for hearing, for people with hearing impairment. So different sound processing technologies for cochlear implants and for hearing aids. And we were talking a couple of years ago, and it was like, why don't we start our own business and develop technologies for our own business? And that's kind of how the whole thing got started. But it was born after a lengthy collaboration in research that we've had for a long time.
Well, so this is going to be interesting to kind of maybe talk a little bit about the dual roles or the dual experiences that you have working across two different institutions. This isn't part of the script. Well, let me go ahead and kind of go down, because I do want to ask if there are things about your experience that were different in your collaboration as faculty, and how may those policies and procedures and the application of that look different when you're doing this in the context of starting a business across two institutions. But we'll get to that in a second. I just kind of wanted to put that on the table. So kind of back to where we were at in terms of the script. So, you know, we're understanding that starting something that you've never done before can be incredibly overwhelming. And part of what we're trying to do in these quick chats is trying to tackle the unknown. So did you participate in any specific programs that kind of helped you think about the business side of these things, as well as the kind of the technology and technology commercialization side of those things? And I think they're interconnected. So tell us a little bit about that. And then tell us a little bit about which support groups kind of helped you, and particularly at what stage.
Yeah, great. I think really early on, I mean, like you said, you just don't know what you're heading into and what you're wading into. And so I think it wasn't so much the program, if you will, was probably really the MCW Office of Technology Development. And that's where that was sort of the entry point for me. And I guess it's an office, but it's a program of sorts where they have a lot of supportive resources and put you in touch with key people who have done this before and developed technologies, have started and run businesses, and they're entrepreneurial. And then also they introduced me to the attorney that we use for the business, Charles Nider, and he does a lot of this work with folks. And so that was kind of really key, because there are a lot of legalities to establish up front, even just getting your business up and running in the first place. And the operating agreement was something that we had to do up front, because everything depended on having a legal agreement between Dr. Hu and me to set the business up as a true entity. So it was really, that's kind of what got us in the first place, sort of got us in the chute, and then we kind of went from there. So I'm not sure if they're.
Let's just pause a minute and kind of break that down. So you guys decide this is like something we want to do, and you walk into the Office of Technology Transfer, OTD for you guys, and you say, okay, well, we're thinking about starting a business. So how does that relationship get started? What kind of questions were asked of you? What kinds of things did you have to prepare to kind of move the dialogue forward?
Yeah, well, it really starts with the technology piece. So it really started at the very, very beginning with a technology disclosure, so disclosing that we've developed this technology. Dr. Hu and I are both full-time employees of our institutions, and so really the technology isn't ours. It belongs to the institutions, and it's up to the institutions to license it to us as the business. And it's something I was sort of familiar with, but not intimately familiar with that all the different processes and things that go with that. So we kind of got in. It was really about discussion about the licensing, the technology, and also for putting in a patent application. And the institutions helped tremendously with that. I think, as you had mentioned a minute ago, working with two institutions, it adds a little nuance to it that is more interesting. I think what's really beneficial, though, at least about MCW and UWM, is they're very integrated and very collaborative with each other. And so the whole way, we actually did the technology disclosure to both institutions at the same time. And we sort of established up front what each of us, what Dr. Hu did, what I did for the technology, and that it was 50-50. We had to sort of establish all those in writing ahead of time as well. And what we think the potential commercialization is for this. And so Dr. Hu and I had to do a lot of work too about what we think of the possibilities of this are, because they also want to make sure that this is something that looks like it could be a technology that could be commercialized and move forward before they put a lot of investment of their own in there. They want to see what the potential is. And so we had to sort of establish that with them up front as well.
Okay, so you had the initial conversation, you disclosed, there's an understanding that your company would have to receive the license, so you have to negotiate some licensing deal at that phase. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that is? I think sometimes that can be very intimidating for people who are new to kind of these kinds of negotiation experiences. And then even sometimes the language is different. And I have heard on occasion, there are kind of gradations of what that license might look like. So there may be a trial period of figuring out what the technology could do. So there's some experimentation period before it gets bumped up to kind of the next level of what a license could look like for your business. Tell me a little bit about what those conversations and experiences look like for you.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The license, the negotiations around the licensing, so MCW and UWM, again, they really have an agreement about how they move forward with this. So on their end, which is really great. To be honest, that's where I leaned very heavily on my business consultant, Lauren Peterson, as well, to help walk through certainly the beginning stages of the negotiation, what are the key questions to ask. I relied very, very heavily on Lauren. What's nice too is that the whole process was really about coming to an agreement that works best for everybody. Because they're representing the institution, and actually I wear two hats at that negotiation table. I am one person, but I'm two separate entities on the negotiation table. So when we're negotiating, I'm negotiating for the business aspect of the license to make sure that the business has a fair share, if you will, of what this agreement ends up being. But then also I'm the principal investigator at MCW. And so there's a piece of it that would go toward MCW, the institution, and my lab as part of this agreement. And so in a way, if I take from one, it's taking from, so it's like I'm the same person. So I'm the embodiment of the conflict of interest that exists with this, right? And that's what's really interesting about doing these negotiations as the faculty member, but then also as the business owner. And that's a nuance that's very interesting and kind of unusual. And so that's where I did rely on Lauren to help with that a lot. The negotiations were actually really fantastic. And again, it was really about everyone doing what is in, like best of intentions, and everything was in good faith. Let's come up with something that makes sense, because the institution also doesn't want to make such a one-sided deal that the company ends up folding or something either. They really want the company to be successful too, because the company's success, the product success is their success. So it's very symbiotic. So it's really about kind of hammering down what the milestones are, and when you can meet them and what's realistic, and just putting in place some safeguards, like in case you don't meet it, you don't have to renegotiate the entire license. So the conversations were actually they were very above board. They were reasonable, realistic, and again, with everyone's best interest in mind the whole time we moved through it. So I can say it was a very good experience. But yeah, I really relied a lot on the business consultant for that, to help with that.
So let's talk a little bit about processes, right? So we've introduced terms like the disclosure, the license portion of it. We've begun to touch on conflict of interest and what that looks like. Maybe that's a good place to kind of do a little deeper dive in, right? So now and maybe this isn't the sequence. So maybe you can educate us a little bit about your experience of the sequence. Now we've disclosed, we've talked about starting a business, we've talked about what the licensing would look like. Somehow we've talked about conflict of interest, and there are multiple elements of conflict of interest. Did you guys talk about a management plan? Did you talk about what that would look like when you're wearing your faculty hat, and if you had any trainees, and what that management process would look like in regards to that versus your business? Tell me a little bit about some of these other terms that you encountered. What were they, and how did you navigate those this is even before we even talk about submitting an SBIR, I assume, or an STTR in your case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so I can't stress enough how important it is for clear and transparent communication with your institution the entire way. Even if you think you don't need to talk about it, talk to them about it, disclose it, tell them everything that you're doing. There are no secrets here. So the conflict of interest piece and the management plan, yeah, that's a key component, especially if you're a full-time employee at your university. Then you're beholden to that university as your employer. There are lots of rules and policies about not being employed by another entity. So you have to balance that as far as conflict of interest goes. So I actually talked to our compliance office, the MCW Office of Corporate Compliance, and was very upfront about what I'm doing, and that this is an outside activity and how much time would be allowed. And what would be okay with the institution, just to make sure. So if you're doing it outside of full-time business hours, you can't say, oh, I'll just do 100 hours outside per week and just not sleep, So there's a limit, right? And I wanted to know what that was. And I let them tell me. I said, what are you comfortable with me putting for effort outside of my proper job here? And so we agreed on that, and that's done by committee. And also, of course, the annual disclosures that I am owning this business, that I got from the grant. I did get some salary from that. And so making sure to disclose that. The institution is incredibly supportive, and universities are incredibly supportive of these activities, as long as you've gone through the proper channels, you followed policy, and that they know what you're doing. So if you work with them all along, that's just my number one recommendation, is work with them all along, be transparent, and work with them to decide these things together. Because then they can help protect you. So if something does kind of go haywire down the line, you're on the same page, and then you can work together to solve any issues that might come up. As far as a business plan or management plan or trainees or other things, one thing I did recently too is I really need help. Our company's growing, we have money, we have invoices, we have things coming in and out, and I just needed help with the paperwork. And so I was actually able to form an agreement with MCW that I can basically pay part of a person's salary, so they stay a full-time employee at MCW, but I'm paying for them to work for the company part of the time. And so, but they pay the benefit, actually I pay the portion of the benefits, but it's really nice. I did that with legal. So I worked with the legal office to do that, and they have that in place. It's really nice, so that you don't necessarily have to have your own HR when you're really getting started. You don't want to necessarily hire somebody and be responsible from that from an employer perspective. But you just get invoice from the institution, you pay that, but they're kind of responsible for the rest of it, the overall employment. But you just have this agreement, they'll spend a certain amount of time per week. So it's been a really nice arrangement. So it allows me to have some extra help, and I do pay my fair share of that, but I haven't had to like go out and try to hire people when really I just need a little extra help right now, and it helps us get going. But there are agreements, but we have a legal agreement on how that works too. So
That's pretty impressive, and I think that's pretty unique in our experiences that MCW does with individuals. So I just want to go back and I don't want to belabor this too much, but I do think it's important, that we really clarify terms. So so we've talked about the disclosure, we've talked about licensing, we've talked about the terminology of a management plan. Did you get a template from MCW on what the management plan should be, or did you have to draft that from scratch, or did you go to somebody else and borrow something like that? And was it done in collaboration with OTD or your compliance office?
yeah, I think so. The actual management plan, there wasn't any real form, or the agreement I had for example, for the person that I hire, sort of hired part-time, that was legal office had template language for that, so they start with it, we look at it together, we negotiate that, and it looks fine. Actually working with the compliance office, I actually sat down with the lead compliance officer, and we sent some emails back and forth, and that's how we established that. So it's not like there's flexibility, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's not so formulated that they're actually like forms to fill out. And I don't think we've even really talked about with the term management plan. It's more about the terms conflict of interest is key, and disclosure of those, and reporting, and those sorts of terms are actually more common. And conflict of interest, though, embodies a lot of things. Of course, we have to do our annual conflict of interest disclosures, but then also making sure you know what all that means, including what you're spending your time on outside the institution. So it's really probably we use conflict of interest as a little bit broader term to sort of make sure that we're on the same page with the different aspects that we've been talking about.
So now I want to get into a little bit of the chronology. So you guys had this collaboration, you decided to start a business, but I know you participated in the SBIR Ready program. I know that you've used the Catalyst Bio Consulting. I always want to call them PICO, but now we've changed names. So, and then, other resources that are in and around the community. Can you tell us a little bit about chronology? Starting a business, then we got into SBIR Ready, or we did SBIR Ready, and then we decided to go ahead and start the business. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's the chronology that is ideal, and there's the chronology that I actually found myself in. So whether I did everything in the exact right order, I have absolutely no idea. If I were to start over, I might have done things differently in order, but it all happened. So really the order was we decided to start this business. We looked into STTR, SBIR funding, realized the mechanism was optimal for STTR. We actually got we submitted and applied for and got STTR funding next. And then that made us eligible for the SBIR Ready program. And then so participating in SBIR Ready, then actually that was beautiful, because the program itself was really amazing, and got us to the point where we could, yes.
Let me just so just terminology. So you got the SBIR STTR, so that then you were in the SBIR Advanced program.
That's what it was. We didn't do SBIR Ready.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Who did actually. Now that
right. He did that with us last summer. Exactly.
Yes. So terminology is key, because things are called different things, right? Yes. SBIR Advanced. So he did the SBIR Ready. And then we did get the grant, and then we did participate in SBIR Advance, as you said. And part of that, though, which was beautiful, is we had to form our team, and getting a business consultant was part of that on the team. That's how we met Lauren. It was actually you guys. It was Dave Lintz who recommended. He sent me a few names. Lauren was on that list, and then when I looked at Lauren's LinkedIn, what he had written, and it looked like he was in healthcare. He understood that. A lot of experience, still very active as the entrepreneur in residence at UWM. Seemed perfect. And when I reached out and when he responded, it just felt like I'd known him forever. And it was a beautiful thing. So he became part of our team, and then he's now currently our business consultant. And I see that relationship lasting a long time. And so then we formed our team there. And then as part of being an SBR Advanced, that's how we found, as you mentioned, the Catalyst Bioconsulting Group run out of MCW, which is a group of postdocs that are brilliant and amazing and really excited about working on this, learning about it, but also really willing to do the work and dig in. And they did so much tremendous help for us in developing the commercialization plan that it was an amazing experience. So honestly, it was getting hooked into the SBR Advanced that really got us hooked into all these other resources that kind of took us to this next phase 2. And we did submit our phase 2 application in April for the April deadline. So that's sort of really the very gross chronology of how we did everything. I'm certainly happy to talk about other details if.
Yeah, no, I think that works. So we'll have to talk to your collaborator about what he thought about SBIR Ready and how that kind of worked for him. But so, and when did you guys submit your STTR?
We submitted the STTR in, I don't know, 2018. Yep. 2018 in September. Yep.
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wrote it at the Kalahari. Down to the water park, and I rented a hut. I rented one of those a cabana, so that I could sit and write the grant, and that's where I finished it. And so it went in for the September. That was the end of August. So.
What a perfect idea! I never thought about that. Yeah,
because you order shit. They can bring stuff to you too, so you don't have to get up. And then if you do need to get up to go to the restroom, you can like stick your laptop in a little cupboard, and then anyway,
that's a pro tip right there. Pro tip. So let's now talk about you got notice of you got notice of a good score and for your STTR, indications that you're going to get funded, and then you get things like just-in-time paperwork, and then you get other new information that, oh, by the way, I'm a business and these are the things. Tell me about one or two of those experiences of, oh my goodness, now I'm responsible for that. What were they and how did you manage that?
Yeah, such a great. So this is the biggest eye-opening time of maybe my life. Is that the just-in-time? It's like, well, we need this, we need this, we need this, and it made me realize all the things that the business is responsible for. That's where I realized I'm not relying on my university anymore. The grant isn't going through them. And we have the added aspect for our mechanism is that we are doing a clinical trial. And so we're doing human subjects research. So registered with the Office of Research Integrity, we have, I have so many, it's a part-time job. I'm just changing my passwords on government websites almost constantly. So, because we're registered in so many areas. And I really realized at that time that, and also the grant was submitted by the business. It didn't go through the institution. That is something I did not understand. And as a PI, it's not my grant personally. It's actually, when I do it through my regular grants through MCW, it's MCW's contract with the government or granting institution. It's not mine personally. And so it's totally different. The business gets the grant. And so I'm the grants manager, I'm the grants officer. The business has the grant, and I'm responsible for every single penny going in and out. I'm responsible for the integrity of the research. I'm responsible for everything. And I get invoiced by MCW and UWM to pay them. So it's really interesting. My own institution is sending me an invoice and they're subcontracted and I pay them because I run this grant. And so that was not something I understood before, and all the different pieces that go with it. So the just-in-time piece took a really long time. I didn't know we needed a federal-wide assurance number. I didn't know we needed single IRB. My business needs institutional review board coverage to do the human subjects research, and I don't have my own IRB, so I have a reliance agreement with MCW to rely on theirs. I had no idea about any of this, and so that's the stuff that I would have probably done ahead of time, next time, had I even known, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So that's why my chronology is like, well, had I known those things, I would have just set it all up ahead of time, but I mostly did it just in time. It got done, but it was a little like, oh, I had no idea what I had to do till I had to do it.
You have also accounting now. You've got payroll. You have to pay taxes on your payroll, and so there's all of that. So you know, you are confronted with filling out new information that maybe you've never done before. Tell me who you went to help you navigate some of these different parts. Were there people at MCW? Were there people in CTC? Were there people outside, you know, service providers that you worked with? Help us know how you got resources.
My main resource for those business aspects and the finances was I got an accountant. So the business has its own accountant. And I went and I met with him and I said, what do I need to give you by the end of next year and in what order? And so that's how I track all of the money coming in and out. And I categorize everything certain ways because he told me this is how it's going to be categorized at the end. And so I met and I figured that out. And so that's how I have everything laid out. And so that this past tax year was pretty straightforward because I went in with my spreadsheets and I said, here you go. And he was like, oh, that's actually exactly what I need. So that's what I did up front. The attorney is also helpful with that, but really, I can't tell you how important it is to read your notice of award. So back in the day, I'd get these grants and I'm like, sweet. And I'd go right to what's the budget? And I'm like, all right, good. Now I know what I need to do. But it's actually, the notice of award has all kinds of information of all the stuff that you're supposed to do. Well, the institution did most of that before. And I realized when I did the just in time, it's actually in my notice of award. And if I go read that very carefully, paragraph by paragraph, it tells me all the federal reportings I need to do, when I need to do them, and everything else. So there are resources and the stuff's out there. I just, it was in front of me the whole time. I didn't see it.
Isn't that funny? So I'm looking at questions now. We have a slew that's come in. Let me lead with this one. So a guest asked they're hoping for you to clarify, did you use grant money to support the text development by using that grant as part of your MCW salary? Now, Liz, I don't know if I understand because you popped that question in when we were talking about hiring or using MCW support to help with some of the administrative stuff. So Liz, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, I'm going to try to turn my camera on. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know if it'll work. So I'm a faculty member who owns a business, and this question is sort of rooted in how do you, knowing that you have to work 40 hours a week at your institution because that's your contract, but you have all these other things that are related to your research that you want to get up off the ground. How do you find the time? How do you like buy out your time to support the business that's related to your research, I guess? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, and what I've done is that's kind of what I talk to compliance about, is how much time can I spend, and it's considered a reasonable amount of time outside of my 40-hour work week. I'm not actually buying any of my time, so I'm not renting myself out from MCW. This is considered strictly outside. And so I get paid from the grant. I get a salary for that, and it's just the percent effort. And they've decided it's 20% effort, so I can do 0.2 FTE. So basically like 8 hours on a Saturday, and they would consider that that's completely separate from my MCW employment. Otherwise, and I've considered this, I've thought about it, if I need more time, it does take as you know, it takes so much time. That if it were eating into my MCW time, I would talk to them, and I'd probably make an arrangement where the business will buy out some of my time from the institution. So for example, maybe another 0.2, and then I'm 0.8 at the institution, but I'm being bought out 0.2 for a total of 0.4, right? For and do something like that. I haven't had to do that yet. I've been able to manage to fit it in the outside amount of effort. But yeah, that's why I talked to corporate compliance about, and then legal to come up with a contract for that.
So along those lines, how challenging in reality has it been to balance your work hours and activities between your business and MCW? And how big of an adjustment has this been?
It's tons of time, a huge adjustment. Fortunately, I love both my job at MCW and running this business, and so it hasn't felt so much like work. But it's been a lot of time, and it's the kind of thing you can't take your eye off of. The business isn't going to run itself even for a second. But I think what happened was really nice. We got support from the state and participating in the SBIR Advance. that allowed me to actually have the extra funding to be able to then hire somebody a day a week to honestly pay the invoices and keep track of the ins and outs and stuff, so I could run the business. And so, because my job really is to make sure we have funding, I need to write these grants, I need to make sure that if we're talking to investors and we're doing those sorts of things, I have to grow the business. So it really is the point where if you can have someone just manage those smaller pieces, the running the business part, and getting the funding and everything, you have to be able to do that part. I was spending all my time, again, changing logins and just managing the day-to-day, and that's what takes up the time. So that's what I've now been able to sort of have taken care of, that frees me up to run the business. And that's a big win to be able to do that.
So I'll ask this question and I'll do a follow-up. So did you have trouble getting MCW to agree to using their IRB, or was there some pushback and explaining to what this was for and how to work with them and all of that stuff?
There wasn't pushback, but there was a little education, especially because this is an STTR, not an SBIR. So it was very confusing for folks to see that I was both. And so I'd send emails when I was running the business person asking a question. I'd send it from my Gmail account, my Ascending Hearing Technologies email, and CC myself at MCW. But if I was asking as the principal investigator, I'd send it from my MCW email. And it did take a little back and forth with the folks in the research office because they just hadn't really encountered that before. But they're used to doing these single IRB agreements, especially because the NIH made that a rule that you have to have a single IRB. And so getting that agreement together was just kind of it was fine, but it was a little confusing as to who I even was and what role I was in first.
And it takes time, because I know in doing kind of this conversation, part of that challenge is that if you're using a protocol that you as a faculty person were doing, and you're making adaptations for what the business could do, then there's some changes that might have to take place and be registered. And that takes time to be able to do this. And in some cases that will stall your award if you don't have these things set up. So have experience with that? Okay, so.
Yeah, I have some really good experience with that. Yeah, this is like, this is therapeutic. Yeah, so the just-in-time stuff, it was one thing after another. I'm like, okay, now I can get the award. It's like, oh, now I need to do this, and like, oh, now I need to do this. And then part of it was this single IRB, and then the IRB, MCW IRB is like, well, what's your federal wide assurance number? And I'm like, well, what is that? And so they sent me a link, and they were supportive, but I did have to go do these things myself. And some things took so long. I got an update. We'll just be honest. I got an updated notice of award from the NIH saying I didn't have IRB approval, because they needed and wanted to give me the funding, but they couldn't wait anymore for me to do the IRB piece, but it was because it was taking weeks. So I got an updated one of that. And then I was able to say, okay, we really need to hurry this up. It wasn't from delays on their side. It's just that this is how it went. But then I'm like, can I please get a letter saying that we're all done, because we were done at that time, that I could share with the so that they could give me a notice of award saying that I do have IRB approval. Yeah, it was a little, yeah. So I got to, yeah. And so
so a question came in: how is the business registered? Is it registered as an LLC or an S corp or some other? And how did you consider that entity when making the decision? What went into that decision process?
Yeah, so it's an LLC. And I think if I can remember correctly what it was, I can't say the exact ins and outs, but I was talking to the attorney quite a bit at that time. We did talk about what the differences would be, and that this made the most sense at the time, certainly. And I can't parse out how this is different from the other ones, like right up front. But that was the decision that was made. It was a lot more I remember it being more straightforward, and how we have our operational agreement, and that's good to go, and that we and how Dr. Who and I would then get paid and things like that. It was just a lot more straightforward, because it's more of a member agreement sort of setup as opposed to corporation and following other tax laws and some other things. It was really more like a pass. It's like a more straightforward model, which of course, as we were first starting out, just to make sure we could even do it. If we never got NIH funding, I'm not sure how far this would have gone, but we did. And so it's like, okay, this is a real thing. We've gotten this investment, so let's really go for it. And then we'll see what we end up doing. But that was a nice place to start, more straightforward, I think.
It's good that you have this conversation, because from my very limited understanding, you can make switches. It does take work to make the switch, and there's a cost to make a switch. But there are definitely considerations. If, for example, you're going to get some investor funding, you might have to make a switch in your entity designation, but that you can do that, when the time is appropriate.
Yep, that's right.
So one last question. So do you have any advice on making, working with consultants or service providers, or if any partnership companies, do you have any advice on making this smoother, or any pitfalls to avoid? I'll go ahead and leave it at that, and then maybe I'll add a sub question too for that.
Okay. I think you have to, you do due diligence, see what you can figure out, network, talk to people, let people know who you trust. Again, with the SBR Advance, with Dave recommending folks, I'm like, okay, well, he wouldn't recommend anyone who he think would be a disaster or not a good fit, so start with some talk to people, get some names, and then do a little research. So I was looking on LinkedIn and I read some paragraphs and I was looking for good fit. Honestly, and it's not just experience, but I was looking, I found Lauren really also about how he worded how he had written his bio and how he sounded. And he just sounded like just such a good person. And it wasn't dry, and it was, I'm just looking for a good fit. And so it really depends on what you're looking for, and look for a fit for that. And so when I saw that, and when I reached out, in writing, really, his response was very warm, and it was great. And then on talking on the phone. So do it piece by piece, leave yourself an out at each one. Like, hey, I'm just checking out a lot of different people. So leave yourself a little bit of an out. So if you need it, you can. Lauren said a really nice thing. And then also with Catalyst Bioconsulting, I'd already known about them from MCW, heard great things. I know Julie Tetzlaff, who was the faculty advisor early on for PICO certainly. And then, and she had talked to me about it before. So it's still, I kind of already knew, and there was some background and they were right there. So just kind of, as Lauren told me, as I see all these opportunities come up, he's like, well, pull on the threads, just, and see what unravels. And so that's what you want to do, is like, if something looks good, just keep going down that path and see how far you can get. If it's at some point you're like, okay, not quite right, then you don't have to pursue it anymore. But I have to admit, when he said that to me, he's like, well, pull on the threads and see what unravels. I'm like, well, I hope it's not me. So far,
after the first part of the trauma of getting the STTR up and trying, you're like, I can't do any more of that. So
right, those lessons are learned though, so I hope that we're at least past that learning curve, and we'll see what comes up, but at least it doesn't seem to be as traumatic as that.
That sounds great. Well, so I'm looking at the time. We've come to the end of this discussion, and I very much appreciate you walking through the steps that you experienced in getting up towards the STTR submission, and then actually receiving and being eligible to receive that award. Before we go, are there any last words of advice that you would tell maybe another faculty who's considering technology commercialization or a startup?
Yeah, honestly, the only advice I would have is be prepared to spend more time on it than you think. You do it because as things come up, you spend the time on it and everything, and you do, but it's really very time consuming, because and also be prepared to think completely differently than you ever have. Developing technology in a business, in some ways, being a researcher and a scientist is entrepreneurial thinking. In a lot of ways, it's outside the box, you develop things, but it's not academia. It's a completely different way of thinking about something. But that's also what I ended up really liking about it, is, wow, this is a way to develop technology and get it out there as a product into the hands of people who can benefit from it. So we're not just trying to learn for the sake of learning or advancing or just moving the needle a little bit. This is actually gives you the opportunity to make a huge leap in something that can help people sooner rather than later and actually get things out there into the hands of patients who can benefit. So that's actually what I really liked about it, but it's a very, very different way of thinking. And the timeline is very different too. It's very quick and you have to be ready to move and do things right away. And it's not like, oh, I have a 5-year grant and I'll put that in my next 5-year grant. It's like, no, this is happening like right now. So, which again is part of the appeal of it, but that's something to be ready for too. It's a totally different way of thinking about it.
That is very fair and frank advice. And so I very much appreciate. Thanks so much for taking the time today to tell us your story. Just in closing, I'll share that the CTC is Wisconsin's free resource for SBI support. And we manage a number of grants and programs helping small businesses and entrepreneurs consider, compete, and win SBIR funding. We do have the DoD topics that are out right now. We have training. If you haven't already registered, it's on June 18th. And we have some other upcoming programs that you should check out our website or our newsletter about. And in closing, a final thank you to you. And if anybody is curious and getting in contact with you, I will encourage you first to reach out to us so we're not just spreading out your contact information. And we can appropriately forward people on. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Idea. I really had a great time. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem.